Lucas, do you want to
did.
impress everybody for a little bit?
Sure. I guess it's my turn.
Okay, great. I'm really looking forward to this always.
Well, so unfortunately, I don't actually have any of my cameras with me. I recently moved, well, not recently, about 6 months ago, I moved from New York to California, put everything I owned in storage, and then the entire world shut down. So I've been living out of a suitcase pretty much. But yeah, so I thought what I would do is just go through my website and talk about the cameras I've made. I just put a new page up about the last camera I made.
Hey, Lucas, before you get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know who you are, but maybe this will wind up on YouTube one day. Who are you? How'd you get into camera building, real quick, and then let's talk about some cameras.
Sure. So I was in art school in New York. I'm originally from Oklahoma, and moved to New York for art school to go to Pratt, where I studied photography. But I had a huge love of engineering and design. And growing up, I had always kind of made my own tools and my own toys, and anything I wanted, the first choice was to make it, not to buy it. So when I went to art school, started doing photography, it was only a matter of time before I started building my own cameras. So my first camera was a 4x5 monorail that was made with good intentions, but the results were not very satisfactory. And since then, I've been on a lifelong pursuit to build what is, in my opinion, the best camera ever made. So to beat the best camera ever made.
Intensely.
Yeah. In my opinion, the Leica M6 is what I consider to be the holy grail of photography. And so everything I do kind of works in that direction of getting to that quality. So I have a big emphasis on like machining, craftsmanship, and design. So a lot of what I do right now and in the past has been kind of based off of watchmaking and clockmaking. So that's where I find a lot of my inspiration and where I learn a lot of the techniques that I use to build my cameras. More in recent history, I've been getting more into contemporary manufacturing. That's kind of what my day job is now. I work in an engineering lab for a tech company. And there, basically over this past 6 months, I've learned a tremendous amount of stuff that I hope to implement in my next camera. Still, no matter what, I do want to stick with the film though. I don't really have much interest in going into digital. I would say 35 millimeter is my 35 millimeter color, preferably Portra 400, is pretty much my standard. And in the past, I shot, starting with large format and kind of moving down in format since then. So let's go ahead and let's see if I can share.
Also, Lucas, if people are following online and going to your website as you're going, where can people find you on the internet?
LucusLanders.com is the best place, and it's spelled a little weird. It's Lucus. A lot of people get that spell it the correct way, which is Lucas, but that's not how I spell my name, unfortunately. How can I put? Can I put something in the chat?
You can, but that chat will not show up in the recording.
Got it.
So
okay.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes, but you just want to go to like present now, and then you can show your website.
Okay. I'm going to share a Chrome tab. Sure. Are you guys seeing a window with my website on it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's see. I'll start at the beginning. Do I have actually any pictures of my camera, my first camera on here? I do not. Okay, that's probably for the best. My first camera was made out of laser cut plywood, and oh, I do, yeah. It was made mostly of laser cut plywood and duct tape. So the bellows I made myself using gaffer's tape, and everything on here except the lens was made myself, as you can tell. And the camera functioned, I would say, admirably. There was a ton of light leaks in the beginning, but once I got those under control, I was able to learn how to use this particular camera. Now, before I made this camera, I had never actually shot large format. So I had seen a large format camera, but never actually used one. So I had to kind of start from the ground up by reading Ansel Adams' The Camera to get a understanding of the purpose and use and design of these cameras. And I think starting from that perspective gave me the opportunity to understand at a very fundamental level how these cameras work and what the benefits are, and also how to operate these cameras. So I was along with the camera, I also read the negative and the print by Ansel Adams, which instilled a very technical knowledge, which allowed me to produce, pretty good photos, I suppose, with this camera. A lot different than the kind of photography I take now, which we'll get into as I go. A lot of photos around New York, mostly. Let's see, yeah. So that was my first camera. I still shoot with it from time to time. I still have it, and it still works really well. The bellows are a little stiff. I have to patch them up quite often. But quickly after I made that one, I moved to what for a long time was my favorite camera, because this one, I didn't really know anything what I was doing on the construction side. And so I took about a year to refocus my efforts on process. And so I took woodworking and metalworking courses, and then created this guy. So this kind of put me down the trend of creating cameras with specific shooting styles in mind. I'm not a big fan of tripods. I prefer to hold and run around with my cameras. And along with that, whenever I shoot, I want the camera to be more or less transparent in my shooting. So I like to shoot where I can set the camera up, and then when a photo appears to me, I don't have to think about the camera. I can trust the camera and know that it will get the job done for me, and be able to just take that picture when the moment happens. So this camera was very much designed with these ideas in mind, and these are ideas that kind of carry throughout the rest of my camera design. And so this camera is a instant press camera. So it shoots Fuji FP100 film, and it has a 90mm Fuji lens, or it did at this point. It has a Kodak lens on it now. And the idea was I wanted to shoot this camera was kind of designed to be shot with a flash and with a fixed focus range. So I would set the camera up for, let's say, 6 feet. And then for the next, pack of film, I would shoot everything at 6 feet. So the shutter, the aperture, the flash, and the focus would all be set. I would shoot until I decided, okay, now I want to shoot at 10 feet. And then I would switch everything up, and I could shoot everything at 10 feet. But because it was set in that way, I never had to think. I always had to just position myself 6 feet away from the subject and shoot. Or a lot of my shots are at infinity. The camera was very easy to set up at infinity. So this is a photo of my mom, shot with a flash. This is kind of a representation of where I started with this kind of camera. And these are instant film. So with the Fujifilm, you get two parts. You get a positive and a negative. The negative you have to extract, and a lot of times you destroy the negative. Negatives gets messed up in the extraction process. So in the beginning, I was very frustrated with that and tried very, very hard to either, ensure that the negative didn't get destroyed or fix it as much as I could in post. And I had a lot of success, but a lot of negatives I was just throwing out because they got damaged. And we'll see shortly here that I started kind of embracing that as part of the process. So this photo here was taken on a rainy day, and humidity kind of messes with the negatives. And also I'm shooting these on the street, so I had like side holsters. I had like little things I would put on my belt to slide the negatives into, and they would stick to each other. They would get all weird. You can see there's weird fungus and discoloration on this. And I started to kind of like, oh, this is part of the process. So I started embracing it more and more, making it part of the image, not being afraid of it. Like you can see here, you can see where the bleach, well, I'm pointing at the screen, you can't see it, but the bleach starts to seep in from the sides and eat away at the image. Before I would have, potentially thrown this image out or tried to edit these imperfections out, but, and just kind of keeping with what it means to shoot with this camera, I decided to leave them in. And for shooting with around people, this camera was great because one, it's a big conversation starter. A lot of people want to have their picture taken with this camera. And because it's a Polaroid, I can take a picture of them, give them the positive, and I keep the negative. Yeah, great way to get people to let you take their photo. But it's also really good, just taking your landscape photos. A lot of these I have printed digitally, very large, up to like 40 inches on the long side. The particular kind of grain that this produces is really unique because the photos are very sharp. The negatives are sharp, but the grain is huge. And the image size, this negative size is huge as well, relatively speaking. And these things kind of combine to make a really, really interesting, unique image, one you can't really get with any other film. I'm just really upset that the film is now so expensive. And also like, so the way the light interacts, so this was taken in Oklahoma, and the sun, when you peel them apart, the negative isn't always fixed. So the sun kind of deep fries your photos if you don't get them hidden quick enough. So I took all these photos in Oklahoma, and I got back and they're all like super saturated, super crunchy. And at first I was really upset, but then I was like, wait a minute, that's, it's once again part of the process. So yeah, this was for a long time one of the only cameras I shot with on a regular basis. I spent so much money on the film. I have binders full of negatives that I shot with this camera, hundreds of shots, which translates to hundreds of dollars, unfortunately, but money well spent in my opinion. And a lot of these, as you can tell, are shot with flash. This camera was built to be shot with flash. And
Lucas, are you still shooting this, or is with at $40 to $60 a pack, or have you retired this camera simply from economics?
It's almost completely retired.
Yeah.
I have like a few packs that I'm saving for a rainy day, but for the most part, it's a shelf camera now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you thought about shooting either paper negs or direct positives or 4x5
shoots or anything like that?
I have, but I think the unfortunate thing is it loses a lot of what made it special to me when I switched the medium. So at that point, it kind of like, I rather remember the camera as it was than switch mediums with it. and this is probably a very extreme example of what can happen to the negatives when they get a little bit screwy. Oh, and this is the first image I shot with it. As you can see, I cut it because the scanner at the time wasn't big enough. The scanner I had at the time wasn't big enough to scan the whole negative, so I had to cut the top and bottom of it off. I also didn't know how to properly extract it, so it's covered in scratches and whatnot. So there's a few more photos, but like a lot of these I have printed, like I said, quite large, and I think to really appreciate them, you need to see them printed. Like most photography, I think the real quality lies in the print. The real unique quality lies in the print. So yeah, let me now move to my first. This one. So now we get to the first of the handheld cameras. What I call handheld cameras. I mean, I know the previous one was technically handheld, but this is where I think a major shift happened in the kind of the kind of cameras I created to more fall in line with my eventual goals. So with this camera, the goal was to make one a full metal camera, and two, to make a roll film camera. So those are the two requirements for this camera. It's a 6.6 format, and it uses a Agfa 85mm, I believe, yeah, lens. And it's the kind of camera where it has a little viewport on the back to see what frame you're on. And that's a picture of me. And the goal of this camera was to make one that functions more closely. Another goal was to make a camera that functions more closely to what we consider now to be a standard camera. So this was also kind of in that direction of making cameras that work in a way that anyone can use one. Because I do find, for me, that's important. I want someone else to be able to pick up my cameras and use it. And it was also one that created photographs that I believed were representational of what a modern camera could create. And once I built this camera, I kind of went wild and started shooting medium format. This is my first medium format camera. I hadn't actually owned a medium format camera before this. And the results were quite surprising. Even with the minimal amount of control I had over the focus, I was able to quite easily, I mean, I had to zone focus everything. And it took me a while to get used to, but once I got used to it, I became quite good at it. And the photos, I think are quite impressive, the quality of photo. All these neon ones are Dan Flavin, which is one of my favorite artists. My internet's slowing down, I think. So this camera, it's very light. That's one good thing about it, and it is very fast to operate. So, like my previous camera, I would often set it up so that I could shoot it in a moment's notice. Quicker the better. A lot of these, like I do a lot of biking, and so a lot of the street photography I'd actually take from a bike. And it's important to be able to just I don't want to have to stop and set my camera up and get it ready and take a photo. I want to be able to just stop, click, go. And a lot of these that are in this particular gallery are not street photography, but yeah, a lot of these are shot at infinity. Let's see if I have any street photography in here. I don't think I do. Yeah, these are a lot of landscapes. Brooklyn. Okay. Yeah. Oh, this is probably better to actually see. And it's also a great indoor shooter. So it functions well in low light, which was a unique quality that I haven't had before. Just kind of a nature of the older types of cameras is they're really hard to shoot indoors. This was taken in the basement of the Strand with available light, and it still is quite good. So yeah, that's that camera. Like I said, major turning point. Hey
Lucas, I wanted to ask. So you've been working towards 35 millimeter range finder of sorts, and you said like the last one was kind of the beginning of coming close to that. At what point did you set that as your goal? I assume that that goal changes a little bit with every camera that you make. But also, I feel like that's probably the one where you made it, and then you were like, "Oh, okay, this is my goal. It's achievable." But that's just sort of my take on what it was probably.
Yeah, I would say it happened. The goal was kind of nebulous at first, and I think I started kind of going in that direction after the instant press camera. But at the time that I built this camera, this brass camera, it wasn't yet solidified to I want to make a competitor to the Leica M6. So it was still, I just want to make technically good cameras. That was kind of at that point, that was my goal. And that definition of what I want that technically good camera to be wasn't yet solidified. I think now it's fairly solidified. And I don't know if you guys have seen my most recent one, but we'll get to it in a few minutes. It's maybe yeah, it's like 5 steps away, I would say. But so this is the AL6 Mark II. It's actually the second one I made out of aluminum. So this was kind of in an attempt to refine some machining processes, because between the two cameras, between the brass camera and this one, I started getting into machining more and more. So I had put together a little machine shop, and this was kind of an attempt to utilize and learn with those tools more than anything. So it's the same basic design as the previous camera, but made of aluminum, because that was a material that I found to be more suitable to first of all, it's cheaper. It's much cheaper, and it's better to work with, and it's more representational of what I'll be working with for a lot of the stuff I'll be doing. And as some of you guys may know, I did a YouTube series on how to on building this camera. Lots of refinements were made, and the quality of the lens was basically, I took more care in alignment and the precise nature of photography, getting the film plane perfectly aligned. And as you can kind of see from here, the sharpness was drastically improved just by taking proper care of alignment. It's made of casting and machining. So I did do cast aluminum in my apartment, which I don't recommend. The smell is horrendous, but got some complaints, but it worked quite well. This one's like welded. My internet's being slow, so I might not be able to show you guys the whole website. I recommend, there's a lot of GIFs and fun stuff in this particular page, so I recommend checking it out if you guys get a chance. Let's see if it just loads in the background. The styling of this camera, I wanted to make it a caricature of the previous camera, because there's a few things a lot of people commented on the styling of the previous, the brass camera, kind of the boxy nature and the cone shapes and all this kind of stuff. So this one is almost a parody of that, I would say. I'll also say that I don't like the design of it. I definitely want to move in a drastically different direction. But it also lended itself quite well to the fundamentals of machining. So this is very.
I want to jump in here. So you said it's like a caricature of it, and it's something like Graham and I have been talking about quite a bit, is sort of the difference between product design and industrial engineering or mechanical engineering. And, you know, I think of myself, I mean, I'm not an engineer, I just play one on YouTube, but, you know, I think of myself much more as a mechanical engineer than a product designer, right? And I think a really good way to summarize the difference is that a product designer starts with an image of the product, whereas a mechanical engineer starts with, you know, the first mechanism that everything needs to be built around, and, you know, adds mechanisms. Your cameras, at least up until this point, even including like the most recent beautiful one, I think of them much more as, you know, mechanical engineering designs, right? They're not much more than what it takes to do the thing it's supposed to do, which I love. It's like very Bauhaus to me. But I know that you are kind of thinking much more about things that I care nothing about, like surface finishes and you know, brushed steel and things like that. Where do you think you fit sort of? You know, I know you do a lot of product design, sort of top-down stuff, or make that thing happen for product designers now at work. What do you think about like the dichotomy between those things? And I mean, it seems like it annoys you to have to work from a mechanical engineer perspective instead of a product designer. But I mean, I think you're great at both. But what's your thoughts on that before going on to more cameras?
Well, I think the response needs to be nuanced. Like, I don't think you can live. One cannot live without the other. You cannot be fully engineer nor fully designer, because designers, their things need to work, and engineers, well, people have to be able to look at them.
or another way to say that is they have to be able to want to pick it up, right?
Yes. No one's going to use a product that has a bunch of spikes over it, you know, either visually or technically. And so I think that the most important thing in either of these is intention. So for someone who's building something purely to function, if you go into it with the intention of saying, you know, this just needs to function, then design is a subtraction from that. Whereas if you are trying to sell a product and you say this just needs to function, design will be an addition to that. So I think it all completely depends on what you want, where you want to take this. If you basically, it requires a nuanced response. I would say, I'm kind of trying, like, I'm basically going through the whole process. My eventual goal with especially this next camera that I want to make is I want to get the technical down to the point where it doesn't limit me. Because in the past, a lot of times I would have an idea for a camera and then be limited by my execution. I want to get away from that. I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. And I also do quite enjoy design. At my new job, it's the most important thing. Not in what I do, but in the company. And if it works for them, it can work for me. Yeah. So with my next camera, I want it to be a camera that I design first and then build second, if that makes sense. Because every camera up until now has been built based off of my own limitations. And so, yeah, I want to kind of circle navigate that a little bit. Don't get me wrong, though. I love engineering. It is the core to everything that I do. But I also went to art school, So I have to make things look good.
You can't cycle with just one pedal. You've got to have two strands, two streams operating together.
Exactly.
If you're
yes.
not in coordination, you mess up. But if you do have both streams, whether it's arts and technology or poetry and the voice, whatever it happens to be, you need to get the nuance that you're speaking of. I think you need to have two separate strands.
See, so Dan, my engineering solution to that would be one clipless pedal.
Yeah.
Hey, Ethan, I'll race you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is something like I really, really admire about your work is how beautiful the cameras are. And it's, you know, for work, I build a machine that, you know, people care about how many cans can come through a labeler per minute. Nobody cares about what it looks like. It's like pure, what does it do? But, you know, for my work in selling cameras, I could do with learning a few things from you.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's all about intention. When you're building a factory, you don't need the factory to look good on the inside. But I will say it is a learned trait. It is something that takes very intentional effort. Like the styling of the Hasselblad didn't happen by accident. I would say actually the difference between the Hasselblad and the Mamiya would be a good case study, because I mean I think they're both beautiful cameras, just very different intentions leading to incredibly different approaches to what is essentially the same problem. And you can see where energy was put in each camera and how that affects them. The same with, like, let's say, you know, like a M6 versus, you know, name a different camera, different 35mm camera, maybe like a Canon AE1 or something. Both very good cameras, both, you know, more or less to solve a similar problem, drastically different values put on them because of how they approached that problem solving.
Let me throw it out to you, to anyone here. I follow what you're saying, and I actually 100% agree. But then looking from the evolutionary perspective, in the origin, all cameras that we have, or that we had then, were all plate cameras. The very first cameras were plate cameras. And if you follow a kind of evolutionary tree, at a certain point, you get the rangefinder and the SLR. And they then go off in very, very different directions. So if you go back to that last common ancestor, as it were, of, say, the rangefinder and the SLR, you'd find a similar process going on with the last common ancestor of the 6x6 folding camera, or the 6x6 Hasselblad. And I think it's kind of curious to look back at those and then ask yourself, from the designer's point of view or the technician's point of view, why did they diverge? And the divergence would certainly be at least partly because of the different intents of the user, whoever the user was going to be.
Yes. No, that's very important to bring up, because in the next project, that's pretty much my opening statement, which is the cameras lend themselves to drastically different shooting styles. So like an SLR is for, like, let's put it this way, you'd never bring a Leica to a studio shoot. So, and that is a very important thing to realize, is you got to not only design a camera, well, I mean, we're all designing cameras for ourselves here, but when a company designs a camera, they don't design it for themselves, they design it for a markets that require different things. So the Leica shooter, you know, they want small and stealth and quiet. A Canon shooter wants large lenses, lots of features, and the ability to hook studio lighting up to it. These dictate very much the design, and so too with the Hasselblad and the Mamiya. You know, the Hasselblad is, the Mamiya is a tripod camera. It's a studio shooter. It's meant to be embedded into an ecosystem. That's where the design and intentions were. Whereas the Hasselblad was more of a slick, almost like handheld camera. It was more meant to be in a more high energy situation where faster, lighter was required. And these have great impact, definitely, on the design of cameras.
No, it's a good point, because it's who, you know, if they bring in somebody to advise on, say, a signature version of some camera, just the same way they do with guitars, you're going to get a lot of tweaks coming out that represent the style and the attitude of the photographer. I mean, I'm sure there have been photographers in the past who've put their stamp on some particular product line of Minolta or Pentax or whoever. And yeah, you've got to consider that. I mean, while you were talking there, I was thinking about photographers I know who've used Hasselblads on a tripod and the RB67 handheld.
Yes.
There are these benefits, but I fully accept what you say about the original intent and where you're most likely to find them.
Yeah, and I like the way you say you're talking about the common ancestor of these cameras, because the divergence between, I mean, like now we have, like you could say that right now in the past 10 years, we've seen a divergence between cameras and cell phones. Because the mobile photography world has exploded, and it's no longer necessary to own a physical camera, a dedicated camera, because for 99% of the people out there, the iPhone covers every single thing they would ever want to do with a camera. And so in the same way that we're seeing, and so now how the rangefinders and SLR split, we're now seeing a similar split where it's like the professionals are still going to be using dedicated cameras, and everyone else will be using some sort of ecosystem.
It's true. It's true. I mean, even though the ecosystem is now ruled by wireless connectivity, it seems that the camera phone, has fed back into camera design with the new products that are mirrorless, the new range, which is mirrorless, and it's another step in evolution. I mean, I have to admit, the idea of the last common ancestor just comes from reading a heck of a lot of evolutionary biology, but I think it applies just as much with
I would agree,
and engineering.
It definitely applies in like cars and car engines in particular. I can trace my Jeep and my Ford van engines back to like a 1940s tractor. It's intensely fascinating to me. But also, we've spent a lot of time on this tangent that I sent us on about engineering and design, and I love like the sort of family tree talk. But I know there's at least one or two more of these ridiculous metal cameras that Lucas should show us now. I want to say.
I think before I get to the new camera, why don't I show you guys some of the fun stuff? I'll start with my pinholes and fun handmade cameras. So I sometimes like to mess around and do things that are, not what I consider my lineage of, I don't kind of group them in with the mission of moving towards the Leica, but I still really enjoy just having fun with these kind of things. So this is just a few examples. Speaking of iPhone photography, I decided to make my own iPhone camera, which is just a iPhone box with a lens on it, and it takes little round photos that are quite fun. So yeah, this is a long exposure of someone sitting on the couch. This was a fun one where it's a hard drive, and I replaced the platter of the hard drive with a piece of film. So it's a round with circle in the middle. So this is a portrait of someone, but the hole basically knocks their face out. I have my own book camera. It's not as cool as the Secret of the Sphinx. But it's basically just eaten away. Put some film in it and take a picture. Very blurry. I had fun with it though.
If I can
This
just jump in a second. One of my mates here, the photographer that you all know, Alex Purcell, was planning to make a camera with a book. And I just ran into him one day and I said, have you thought about a nice thick book, a Bible, for example? And he immediately bounced it. Oh yeah, a Pinhole Bible. That is the thing.
That's not bad. I didn't put any thought into my book. I just went to the Strand and I was like, give me the thickest cheap book you got, and that happened to be an encyclopedia. But I do really like the pun. Yeah. This one I actually liked a lot because it's a two-way pinhole camera, and the idea is you got 2 sheets of film, and you poke a hole in each sheet. So film A is the lens for film B, and vice versa. So you get a pair of images. Let me see if I can zoom into this. I don't have it set up so you can. And you can see there's a hole in the middle of each piece of film. That's because this photo is exposing the film for this is exposing this photo, and the film for this photo is exposing this sheet.
This reminds me of an Apple patent that I've been waiting to actually come out in a product for a webcam in the middle of your screen under a pixel or two.
Yeah, yeah, kind of like that, yeah. And also, speaking of Apple products, they kind of stole this idea. They didn't steal this idea, but they now have an app that records with both the front-facing and rear-facing camera at the same time. Kind of a similar concept to this. So that's the last of the pinholes. Now we got to go to this one, which is, yeah, it's a very tiny sheet film camera. It is in the lineup for the world's smallest sheet film camera. They sent me all the qualifications that I have to meet. It's just since I moved, I haven't been able to have time to parse through them and get it verified. But it's less than an inch cubed. And it takes, it's a pinhole, and it takes, tiny little photographs. I think we'll see a better picture of the photograph. So I have some stuff in here about the design and the build process. This one is almost entirely CNC made. Okay, let's see if I can show you the pictures. The bellows were actually the hardest part to build. I made like a little CAD design, cut it out use some, this is cloth, it's rubberized cloth used in accordions and musical instruments that have bellows inside of them. Very thin and decently light proof. It wasn't perfectly light proof. It took 5 or 6 tries to get it right. But the results, acceptable, I would say, considering the size. Here's the negative holder. This was really hard because it's 3 pieces of metal that are then riveted together. I think you can kind of see the rivets. And so you have a dark slide that slides in the top, and then this plugs the bottom, so you can pull the sheet out. And to cut the negatives, I made a jig that basically a piece of 35mm film runs through it, and it has 2 slits on the top and 2 slits in the back. So in a dark room, I can run a razor blade through those 4 slits, and I pop it open, and I have a little sized piece of film. Now the photos are technically photographs. I wouldn't say they're. You can kind of see me in this picture. I got some new film. I got a bunch of different film options for whenever I get this another go. Basically, I got some like ultra fine grain film. This is also taken with strobes, and it took 13 strobe pops, I think, to make this photo. So I was sitting with the trigger in my hand and just firing the strobe one after another for about 20 seconds. Yeah, that's the tiny camera, which was probably one of my favorite builds. It took, just took like a week or so to put together. Had a lot of fun with it. And this is the new guy. So this is by a huge margin my most complicated camera I've made. It is, I call it the B35. It is based off of a retina lens and my first 35mm film camera that I made. Let's see. The build was extremely difficult. This is it took, I mean, like this particular one took 4 months to build, but I would say it took about a year start to finish when you consider all the learning I had to go through and all the iterations and the gear making process and maximizing my concentricity, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so here's, I put some pictures of some parts I made. Like here's like a ratchet stack. This is a slipper clutch. This is used in the film advance mechanism. Here we can see some cams. So all of this is hand cut basically. So I designed it in CAD. I based it roughly off of various film cameras that I reverse engineered. So these are like hand cut. I have some process photos I can show you guys if you want. Yeah, we can see like little rack gears. Lots of stuff went into it. You can see here kind of the stack. All of this is handmade. It's kind of, you can kind of tell it's an aluminum frame draped with brass. So the design of this kind of came from my love of horology. I'm really big into clock making, as I said, clock and watch making. A lot of the internal components were made using techniques that I learned from clock making. And because of that, I decided to style the outside based off of various, like traditional clock design, more or less. So brass, exposed screws, stuff like that. And so this is, I'll show you guys some more process photos. This is showing it in various stages of construction. Like I 3D printed this component before making it out of brass. Yeah. Don't worry, the lens actually is straight on the real camera. And yeah, that's it. That's how it turned out. It's a very solid camera.
What is the weights, Lucas? The weight grams.
More than I would like.
Yeah.
It weighs slightly less than a Leica.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not like a brick, but it is. You walk around with it for a few hours, and it definitely starts wearing on you. And so this camera I made with my specific shooting style. So I'm a big street shooter, as I've said before, and I wanted a camera that was small and stealthy. But like a Leica, I also wanted it to look good. So I wanted something that could be worn as kind of a fashion item, accessory, and a very, very functional piece of technology. So I think it turned out quite well in the photos. Like I was really happy with the photo quality. Getting back to shooting with 35mm, You do have a loss of negative size, but I think 35 millimeter is really good at capturing movement and like slice of life stuff. I think from that perspective, the camera does quite well. There's like a dog. So these are just photos I took, walking around. I unfortunately haven't had much time to shoot with this. I've only shot maybe like 20 rolls with it. Maybe not even that much. It's in storage right now. I didn't think I would be in storage for so long, but yeah, so that's the new camera. That's the new guy. And I guess from here, I have a lot of big plans once I get my shop set up, but which is happening very soon. Thankfully, I'm getting a shop again.
Hey, Lucas, you want to maybe kill your screen share and then tell us a little bit about what's next that you care to share?
Sure. So I guess for a while now, actually since before I started this one, I've been working on shutter design basically. The next one, my goal is to have a M-mount body with a cloth shutter and a rangefinder that is accurate. So it might be ambitious, but that's the goal. I don't know if I'm going to make the rangefinder myself or if I'm going to scoop it out of something. I have a whole bunch of Zeiss rangefinders of varying quality and application, but that's the goal. So basically one step closer to the Leica, and it's probably going to be a cloth shutter without slow speeds. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with the way shutters work, but basically slow speeds are a separate mechanism, and I don't want to make that mechanism right now. So it's going to be 30th of a second to 500th of a second, somewhere in that range.
Much easier.
Yes, much easier. Figured for my first one, it'll be easier. And I've had a prototype. It didn't work. Now that I have a lot more skill and knowledge, I'm going to try it again. The main thing that I really want to try doing myself is the springs. So you have two main springs that power the shutter on the take-up spools, and the goal is to be able to make those springs. I had a lot of luck learning about spring design and manufacturing over the past few months, and hopefully I'll be able to apply that to this.
We should talk another time about Arduino and 3D printer powered spring winding machines that I've seen some on YouTube of late.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's probably going to be it's going to have to be a dedicated machine probably to make these springs. And I imagine that's where a bulk of my effort.
Yeah, I've tried to design the same for like off the shelf springs, and like getting consistent springs that fit is very, very hard if I'm not just going to rip them out of cameras, which will cost a couple $100 for a pair of springs.
Yeah. And it's kind of like for me, it's usually when I build a camera, it's like, okay, what's the hardest part gonna be? And that's where I try and dedicate a lot of my effort. And this one, I think it's gonna be the springs and the linking of a rangefinder.
You do it on purpose, finding
yes.
the task.
Yep, it's part of my masochism, but yeah, it's what I do. So it's all right.
Yeah,
as camera makers. So that's a little bit about me and my process and my cameras.
I can't wait. Hey, Lucas, one more time, where can people find you if they're watching along on the internet?
Oh, lucuslanders.com, LUCUSLANDERS.com, or cropped_camera on Instagram. The Instagram I might be posting to more soon. we'll see. I haven't posted in like 6 months. So.
Thank you very much, Lucas. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, could I ask you about that B35?
Yeah, of course.
How did you interface with the lens? It looked like you had a cocking mechanism and a shutter mechanism. Did you have two windows for a rangefinder too?
So the rangefinder is from the retina that the lens came from. So it's kind of a lens rangefinder setup pairing. So they kind of work together.
The lens and you transplanted the rangefinder also from the retina.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. Nick has the exact camera I used right there. And so the cocking mechanism, so basically the lens has the shutter inside of it as well. And if here, I can share my screen again. Let me see. Actually, I might be able to share just my present. Oh, it won't let me actually share my
camera torn apart right here in a drawer. Which piece do you want to see, Lucas?
The cocking mechanism.
Okay. So this stupid rack that's broken on mine, which is why it's in pieces, right? So when you, let's see if I can see my screen. When you wind the lever, there's a gear that turns and pulls this rack, and it moves this way. And then you saw on Lucas's camera, there was like a pinion gear that went in and out, and these teeth ride on that pinion gear. This set of teeth, this is the weakest part in the retina, and it's very hard to find one, which is why my camera is in pieces. But it turns that pinion gear, and then, let's see if I can open this up. That pinion gear sticks through a shaft into, it's covered, but I think you can see there's a little gear here, which then cocks the lens. Is that an okay explanation?
Yeah, so whenever I built that camera, that lens interface was one of the things that I had to work around. So there's basically a power transmission path that I had to build into my mechanism. So at the end of the day, there was basically, at a certain point, I had to have a gear that rotated along with the way I advanced the film. So that was one of the metrics that I couldn't change with this camera design. So my gear stack is a little bit different, and the way the gears move and operate is a little bit different. But for the most part, I have a rack and pinion that sends power to the lens, and that's how they're linked. So whenever I rotate the shutter, a bit of power is sent to the lens to wind it.
Also, for reference, this is the rangefinder mechanism, which more or less comes out of the retina in one piece. I have not disassembled it much. All right, but it's it's got a couple mounting holes in the bottom. It's a very nice rangefinder.
Yeah, so that's another reason why I chose that particular camera, because it's just a great pairing, and it's quite a good lens. I mean, the photos that it produces are really nice. So it more or less, like, there's just a bar that goes from the lens to the rangefinder, and as long as that bar is calibrated, basically, you're good, as long as the distance is correct. And it's a pain in the butt to get right, but it works quite well. In the next camera, I want to have more or less a universal rangefinder. So kind of how a Leica works, or a lot of rangefinders, you're able to put just any lens within that ecosystem onto the body, and it'll be linked. And
that's by having variation in the lens, isn't it?
Yes.
The curve on the lens that is
so
essentially there's a cam which is an analog way of matching literally the curve of the focus range with the mechanical action. So,
Mm.
I mean, it's very elegant because you can represent it as a curve on a graph, but there's actually a curved piece somewhere in the way the mechanism works that directly links one movement with another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to say too that particular camera, the lens, comes in an amazing shutter. Mine is a $40 camera that's very old. It's one of the early ones, and that shutter is perfect. And not only is it 100% accurate at each speed, but between most speeds, it continuously gives you intermediate speeds. It's really an amazing piece of machinery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I basically went on eBay and I bought every single one I could find. I think I artificially drove up the price of these cameras for a while. If anyone wants just a great 35 millimeter camera, that's still reasonably priced, and I think produces a fairly unique image quality. The retinas are good. They're pretty solid. There's a guy on YouTube who goes over every little nook and cranny of how to service one. So if anything does go wrong, you can figure it out. I think it's a great camera to, like, if you wanted to get into building a 35 millimeter camera, just making a replica of one of these guys will teach you so much.
Mm.
Yeah, very sophisticated. And I also, if you're actually interested in using one, I like the older ones. This is a Retina 2, and the older ones have a lot less mechanical issues.
Mm.
Some of the newer
Yeah,
ones.
because I think.
And the other thing is that any camera that folds up and you can just shove in your pocket and it protects the lens, that's a marvelous feature.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's up there. It's probably up there in one of the all-time underrated cameras. I don't know why it's not more of a thing.
I think that the one thing that puts people off, modern camera users, is that the rangefinder is very accurate, but the viewfinder is very small. And
Yeah.
a lot of people are used to being immersed in the view through the lens. And I find that that's great for some kinds of photography, but for other kinds, it's actually very distracting. And sometimes that tiny viewfinder gets you to pay attention to what's happening instead of, like, falling in love with the view through the lens and being distracted by that.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you're not photographing something with too much detail in it, the little viewfinder can be an advantage. You can always stick a big one on top too, if you want that.
Yeah. And well, I'll say I looked a lot at people who shoot with these kind of cameras, and I found, like, a lot of people talking about it. A lot of people like these cameras for shooting from the hip. So if you're the kind of guy who doesn't like looking through a viewfinder at all, it's a great camera for that. The focusing is very easy. It's a front optic focusing. No, it's not a front optic focusing, but it does have a big focus ring on it. That's easy to operate when you're holding the camera below you. So if you're holding it kind of at chest or waist level, it's very easy to operate. And it's so quiet. It's got the lightest little leaf shutter in it. You can barely hear it when it triggers.